The support for international learning with cloud computing is something that's becoming increasingly important for a number of universities as they reconsider the element of the international teaching and learning offering and the general international collaboration that they offer across the sector and to students from all different backgrounds and all different walks of life who increasingly need different types of education provided to them and different types of qualifications that are all catered for by universities and the way in which they are modernising their offering or accelerating changes that they'd already begun to put in place. So, Jude, I'd like to start by asking how can cloud-based solutions be used to help universities reach international students fundamentally?
Yeah, well, firstly, great to see you again, and thanks for having me back. A lot of what you just mentioned is increasingly empowered by digital technology, and global cloud platforms like our own offer a secure, truly global way for universities to reach students. And let's, for context, this is a big deal for some economies. In Australia, I think it's the third biggest export, that is higher education. In the UK, I think we're aiming, Steve Smith, the government's champion for international education, is aiming to sustain and grow our exports to 35 billion by 2030, and Canada and the US and so on. So it's a major component of lots of economies. We heard earlier today from Inspira, an edtech that focuses on assessment, and there are hundreds of others that are pioneering new ways of supporting students worldwide, and most of those sit on AWS's cloud, including Inspira. And it's partly about the ability to scale almost without limit with demand. And we saw during the tragedy of last year, governments having to move students online very quickly and scale in unprecedented dimensions. And they could only do that on the cloud. We moved millions of students online within weeks in many countries. And that is something that I think taught a lot of education systems about the importance of being able to scale quickly. Security, of course, it remains a big issue. But what we've also learned is that cloud provides fluid and responsive experiences almost anywhere in the world, given a reasonable internet connection. And it's increasingly about not only the ability to scale with safe infrastructure, but the technologies that sit on that infrastructure. And so the technologies that are enabling universities to innovate at pace and do all sorts of things, many of the things that have been spoken about during this conference over the last few days are being tackled through digital technology for the first time. And so it's enabling universities to adjust with the times here and overseas to the evolving wants and needs of students themselves, employers, governments, and using technologies, hundreds of technologies, but machine learning or analytics, for instance, to help universities be able to not only continue but augment the teaching and research that they have been doing for, in some cases, up to 1,000 years.
So in terms of you've spoken about the responsiveness of the sector and the ways in which we've already managed to move an awful lot of teaching and learning online. Are there longer term challenges that persist regarding access that still need to be addressed? And are there solutions emerging for this? If you are in a low access area or you require distance learning, are there solutions being presented already that are starting to bridge that gap and make life easier for certain students and teachers?
Yeah, well, it remains a striking issue. If you think about the lack of connectivity, 46% of the world's population, that's over 3.5 billion people, still live without internet access. And I think 90% or so of those people are in developing countries. 30% of homes in Europe still don't have a broadband subscription. And we haven't even yet started to talk about the availability of devices, which was something that came to the fore during the pandemic in the most advanced economies. So it's something I think that is in the realm of governments and NGOs really focusing on closing that gap. the technology is here, the content is here, the sector from K-12 through higher education and beyond is adjusting to the new reality beautifully. And as a former tutor and father of two students, by the way, I'm grateful, but also in awe of the way the sector's adjusted and continued educating the world's children and young adults. But there are fundamental issues being addressed with varying success by governments and NGOs and the like. We stand ready to do everything that we can, but the technology is waiting in a sense. The technology is ahead of the basic infrastructure that some parts of the world need.
One of the other questions that's come up, or rather one of the priorities that's been noted, is the need to support student communities and also wider universities communities that include staff and students. Can cloud-based education help do things like teach the skills and build the community groups that will integrate international students so that they don't feel alienated? Because it's a very, very difficult time to be an international student in many respects.
Certainly is. When you look at the different experiences of universities and students in leading exporters like Australia, Canada, the UK by and large did well. Students were able to continue their education, take up places that they had been offered, and carry out most of the year online. The real problem in other countries was that the system was designed for people to attend. They couldn't get through the borders for good reason, and therefore couldn't take up the places or continue their education. And it did a lot of damage to the systems in some countries. I think there's all sorts of ways in, and of course, what another lesson from the pandemic is that remote learning can be an isolating experience, which further exacerbates, it is thought, the stresses of being a student and indeed a teacher. And so we're seeing a number of responses to that emerge. There's more focus on the co-curricular, life skill development and so on that we need to complement the purely academic digital experience. But equally, some universities are beginning to use digital technology to help them understand issues of well-being. So whereas in the past they've used predictive analytics, for instance, to detect or predict when students are going off track academically, similar approaches are being used to try and detect issues of well-being. So it's not to say that technology can't help and play a role in the other side of things. It certainly is. And then in terms of community, there's all sorts of initiatives underway. I've just come off a call with the British University talking about their alumni network and lifelong learning and how those two things mesh, how we build online experiences that come as close as they can to mimicking the campus experience from undergraduates through to alumni. So there is a lot of thinking, at least, going into how to create communities that augment, complement, balance an increasingly online system of education.
So now the initial shift has happened, what are the main challenges being identified by AWS's university partners? So in order to help them build an effective asynchronous blended approach that can do all of the things that they want to do and that they're now being asked to do by many of their students?
Yeah, well, it's been, as I said earlier, I'm in awe of the varied efforts worldwide of colleges and universities, schools to adjust so quickly. And we've seen, haven't we, the emergence of all sorts of slightly different approaches. So we hear about flexible and blended and dual in the case of UEL that we heard from earlier today. And these are all variants of a theme to A, continue education, and B, to respond to the need for more student choice. We heard earlier today from Ian Dunn at Coventry, who was talking very clearly about the emerging wants and needs of students and the role of data in providing better experiences, redistribution of tutor effort from one type of face-to-face to another. And so there's all sorts of efforts to try and increase student choice, give them more flexibility. My daughter has enjoyed the flexibility. I think they all wish that there was a bit more opportunity to be in a lecture theatre or a seminar group or whatever, but she has appreciated the choice, and I think that's here to stay. There's a ton of examples of how digital technology has enabled universities to continue and offer more flexibility. We believe that's here to stay. The debate rages on the debate and the impact on learning. World Economic Forum recently said that online learning can be up to 6 times more effective in terms of retention, 40 to 60% faster. And there are all sorts of opinions to the contrary. But the truth is that without the digital technology that we and others provide, the pandemic would have been a decidedly more difficult period, and one that wouldn't have led to the increased choice that we believe is here to stay.
You spoke before about how the technology is here now and it's scalable, and that's provable by the many examples we've got of universities that have done that already.
Yeah.
The other side of this equation that keeps coming up over the course of this event is the cultural shift needed, and that's both changing attitudes across the university through staff and students, educators, administrators and learners, but also the need to kind of enable bottom-up innovation and get the most out of people who are early adopters and who do really want to drive forward with the opportunity that they've now got. And that when you say to a lecturer or a course provider, yes, you can put everything on the cloud. Yes, you can start to pull in components from international universities. You can start to change the way that you teach your lab classes online. You can embed skills and project groups and peer learning, and you can do it all through remote access. Is there a danger that you perhaps overawe people when you put all that out in front of them? You know, is one of the hardest challenges finding a roadmap through it?
Certainly. Well, it appears harder than it is. We heard from Neil Morris at Leeds earlier talking about the need for conducive cultures, progressive, innovative cultures. And I think, as I've said a couple of times now, the sector has made amazing leaps forward in terms of their ability to innovate at pace. I think half of the challenge, Alistair, is putting the organization in a conducive environment that enables innovation to be executed. There's no point encouraging an organization to develop an innovative culture, and Amazon's very well known for having and sustaining an innovative culture from its inception. If you're unable to empower, enable, indeed expect people to execute on that innovation, and that requires architecture and all sorts of mechanisms that enable that to happen. It's happening, you know, it happened in a matter of weeks in March last year for many universities. I remember a few of the vice chancellors at conferences like these saying, you know, I've been asking to be able to do this or that for 10 years and been told it's too important, it's too tricky, too risky, too expensive. And yet we did it in 3 weeks when we had to. So, you know, universities are by definition, some of the most innovative institutions on the planet. I was reminded by Stephen Tully at Cambridge not so long ago that they've never stopped innovating for, in his case, over 800 years. And so they have that innate ability. What at times it seems they don't have is the environment, the platforms, the skills, the will to be able to do it. But when they have to, they do. And as I say, I think that's created momentum that is irreversible. And you know, when you talk about using technology, excuse me, to enable universities to have many more students, few of which ever come to the UK, lots of controversy around that, lots of diverse opinion, but that is enabled by technology. And therefore, I think 2 things in conclusion: inevitability of cloud-based education and what that means for students will compel universities to become more and more innovative as time goes on and take advantage truly of the digital opportunity.
Does the kind of diversification that you're talking about, does that enable closer collaboration with industry and government? I mean, I know you can't speak for the entire AWS offering, but obviously as a cloud computing architecture, it's not just supporting universities, it will support these other stratas too.
Yeah, well, you know, this is a sort of a bundle of interrelated issues that's been around since I've been in education for a long time. And I suppose at the most summary of levels, the questions are concerned with a mismatch of what industry needs and what government thinks industry needs and what universities and colleges and so on are able to produce. So for example, I think we produce something like 30,000 computer science students a year. in the UK, which is growing, 7.5% last year, but it's still far short of what employers are needing and advertising jobs for. But of course, it's not down only to the universities, it's down to the appetite of candidates to apply for these courses. And then even if the economy manages to balance supply and demand of certain skills, there remains the question of the capabilities that graduates emerge with. And things move so quickly that oftentimes the curricula are unable to keep up with, particularly, as I say, in fields such as computer science and other areas. And so we're seeing organizations like our own trying to help by providing courseware. We have two programs called AWS Educate and Academy, which offers free courseware, training for faculty and so on, to help them ensure, and this is full end-to-end degrees and modules that enable universities to augment their offers and keep them up to date and relevant. And lastly, it seems increasingly likely, at Amazon we believe deeply in learning by doing. And I think learning pathways might become even more experiential in future. So my daughter's on a sandwich course, for instance. She's going to have a wonderful year in industry abroad. That's great. But I suspect in future, simply because of the agility with which universities are able to curate courseware and deploy it, I suspect we'll see more experience built into the academic process, which I think would be fantastic. And as I say, it's just increasingly possible to be agile about these things. There was a great quote from, I think it was the University of East Anglia, one of the DVCs there was talking about it taking 2 years to design a course that can now be done in a matter of weeks, thanks to the agility of the availability of content and the ability with which they can curate it.
Yeah, I suppose that's a pressing consideration, just because, like you say, just because you can build these highly effective, highly consumable models, it doesn't necessarily anticipate how long it takes to refine that and to constantly change in response to what different people want, different stakeholders want.
Indeed, if I may, just very, very briefly, I happen to center on computer science there, but the truth of the matter is almost every industry, public sector, private sector, third sector, is being disrupted in some shape or form by digital technology. And so, whether you're studying geology or veterinary science or landscaping, the chances are that you'll be faced with the need to innovate or deal with digital technology in your careers.
I actually interviewed a lecturer from a head of school at Edinburgh Napier yesterday who taught at 3 different universities this year. Right. And he said that would have been something that would have been either he would have been told flatly that he couldn't have done it, or it would have been very difficult because he would have been required to go there and do it in person. And the difference between doing it online and doing it in person was that he argued you had the same, if not a stronger, engagement with the community of students that you are meeting through that medium. So there are real world examples of this stuff happening already, I think.
Yeah.
Another question I had, which is to your earlier point about sort of the need for demand being met by industry. Do you think there will be, or maybe has it happened already with curriculum co-design, you could get a merging of cloud architecture between industry and education in order to build very bespoke models for education that don't necessarily serve a traditional 3-year undergraduate course, but enable upskilling and reskilling, or other forms of short courses?
Certainly, we're seeing universities respond to those needs. We're seeing entrants. There's the Coursera's of the world and many others, many of which sit on our platform and make use of the technologies in delivering these alternatives. And so we see our role as enabling institutions to usher in a new era. But I agree. I think there's lots of consideration. Well, it's pre-existing for many, many years. But again, COVID taught us so much about what works, what doesn't, and helped us realize gave us confidence, I suppose, that we can adjust and change the way that things have been done for many hundreds of years. So I think that universities and colleges are adjusting. I think there are entrants that more than displacing will complement. And I think you're right. Architecturally, technically, we'll see a lot more collaboration between the sort of traditional institutions and models with the newer emerging institutions and models. And in fact, we're seeing many of our EdTech partners who sell to schools, colleges, and universities playing an increasingly central role in the way that teaching is delivered. If you think about the personalized agenda and using machine learning to ensure that there are individual or individualized experiences, enabling students to learn in their own way, at their own pace, and focus on their strengths and so on and so forth. It is an example of traditional institutions collaborating with this new generation of technology providers in order to provide, as I say, a better, safer, cheaper, deeper learning experience for children and young adult students.
Is it also important to consider things like spin-outs and SMEs when we talk about industry? Because perhaps everyone defaults to, when you remove all the borders, you immediately start looking at, major employers and governments and people that are responsible for thousands or millions of jobs around the world. Given the rich history that universities have with spin-outs and with fostering innovation, is there now a chance to build out locally on an international scale by using cloud architecture and international collaboration?
Yeah, there really is. I mean, by definition, almost, a cloud-based edtech is instantly global. Many of our customers are tiny and very quickly being able to land their services in many countries. And the users in those countries have identical experiences. And so I totally agree. No longer is a global business the purview of the big multinationals. The way it works today is, if you are expert in a field and you're able to combine our technologies in a way that enhances learning or research or assessment, as we heard earlier, in some way, you're instantly able to offer that operationally and commercially anywhere in the world. And that is happening. We're seeing very small organizations that sit on our platform. CenturyTech is one in the UK, for example, that's growing very quickly with a new breed of technologies that help schools get better outcomes.
There's another question I had along those lines, which is, we've already spoken a lot over the past couple of days about embedding skills as part of curricula and the way that a modular and a more inclusive approach from universities can help deliver that, and is being championed by many of the people who are at universities already. That sits alongside knowledge in order to complement knowledge and make more employable graduates. Is there a third strand to that, which involves teaching students the commercial aspect of starting their own company, establishing themselves as business? Could there be a further permutation of this where we are breaking down the barriers between what might be a business school education and what might be a humanities subject?
It's a really interesting question. I don't know that the process of setting up a business has changed much, although it has in some countries. But what has changed is the ease with which young people can build something and get it out there. That has changed out of all recognition. The access to these amazing technologies at very low cost and therefore low risk sort of experimentation means that almost in every pocket of an economy, if you spot an opportunity to improve, automate, make safer a particular process, and we see this, education, health, pharmaceuticals, automotive, whatever it is, the chances are that you're able to, as I say, combine our technologies in a way that bring about improvement. And in part, it comes back to your earlier point about innovation, but I think you're right. I think that there is perhaps not since the Industrial Revolution been such a dramatic opportunity for startups to grow at such a rate and create something and break through with it.
There's I'm also mindful of the fact we're talking about things becoming increasingly fragmented and a sort of an always-on culture, and the fact that any company can become global instantaneously through this architecture. There's still the other aspect to consider, which is, why does international study remain popular? And it's not just the education you get, of course, it is the cultural experience and its embedding in place. Further on to that, I mean, when we talk about universities diversifying or making the most of the new tools that they have, there are announcements like, the Northern Gritstone, which was announced last month, the collaboration between Leeds, Manchester and Sheffield, which is designed to foster spin-outs, foster private investment. Is it important that universities don't lose sight of the sense of place now that they have all of these tools for greater internationalization at their fingertips?
Yeah, another great question. And we shall see. These are extraordinary times, aren't they? Because things like that have been chewed on for many years by universities and observers of universities, and now being surfaced and dealt with very quickly. I think there's a fundamental difference between education and training, and I think entrepreneurial endeavors span both of those things. I think universities are getting better and better at themselves spinning off commercial concerns and enabling their students to do the same. And I think that's a healthy, I think that's a good thing. I don't know that will continue such that they leave academia and research behind, but it's an interesting tension. I certainly see your point. And I hope that whatever the optimum balance is, that they manage to strike it quickly. And I suppose ultimately the economy will, I mean, as someone who's interested in economics, the economy will probably create that balance for them.
Yeah, I mean, when I've heard people speak before about things like in reaching the 2.4% target that the UK set itself in terms of research funding, to offering dual roles for in-demand academics who also have a lot to offer on an industrial basis, this may perhaps be something that trickles further down the pipeline, so that even students and people who are upskilling and reskilling start to see these kind of balanced roles that you're talking about as an option. So you will not just have a purely industrial role or a pure research role. There may be greater flexibility in terms of what both industry and universities are offering, and then obviously that has implications for who you partner with internationally as well. I think that, well, from my perspective, an important regulator of how quickly that progresses, and I think it's close to inevitable, it's been, it's on an increasing trajectory, is again the ease with which academics are able to interpret their work in a form that adds value in some way, and how quickly and cheaply and easily they can make that happen, or at least a prototype, and vice versa, where just access to research for industry technology is also enabling. One of our partners runs an interface. I'm sorry, I'm hearing an echo. Sorry, no, yes.
I think it's got away now. But I think it works both ways. You could see people working predominantly in industry becoming more involved with academia and vice versa. And in large part, that's again down to the accessible technologies that are continue to emerge.
Great, thanks. I think that almost brings us up to time. We're just a tiny little bit short. I don't want to. Okay, I think we've got another few seconds. Thank you. It's been really interesting to hear your insights, and also to get the kind of top-down approach that AWS manages through all the different interactions it has through cloud computing. I mean, on the whole, just in closing, is the appetite generally a positive one? Would you say, we've heard obviously from people who, by their definition, are interested and are very championing these causes, who are on our panels over the course of this event. Is the rate of adoption from students and from administrators, when you have these, and IT directors and the technical staff that you must deal with, does it generally feel now like there's people coming together and collaborating in a way, or at least having appetite to, that they maybe didn't previously?
Absolutely. I hate to keep referring to the pandemic, but what it did was accelerate the state of affairs that we now see. Lots of the sort of protectionist fear or cautiousness, I should say, just evaporated. And I think whether we're talking to government, students, employers, leaders in higher education, all the way down to schools that have a different set of responsibilities, there is an overwhelming positivity about the role of digital technology in all the ways we've discussed and many more in the furtherance and the improvement of our systems of education worldwide.
Okay, great. Right, I think, sorry, I've got a slight connection problem back at the studio, so I'm just going to ask you a couple more questions.
Okay,
I
of
keep
course.
It's all right if you have to drop off, then obviously I know you've got another purposes. One of the points I did want to ask about was about alumni engagement that we didn't have quite time to squeeze in terms of how is that changing in the conversations that you're having with universities in terms of, are they making that a strategic priority in a different way, and how does cloud-based systems help support that?
Yeah, well, we talked earlier about the importance of foreign students to many economies and the importance for the students. Most of my education was in different countries, and I think it's a valuable, useful thing to do. And so part of the challenge has been for universities to keep in touch with alumni spread all over the world, and for the reasons we've discussed, the cloud is an ideal platform to enable that to happen. But equally, creating a sense of community in the past has basically been down to UX, the user experience, the user interface on a website. And I think there's a lot more that digital technology can do to create a purposeful experience for alumni when they want to remain connected with their university. And the reason I think this is becoming increasingly important is because of the advent of lifelong learning as a good thing for human beings to do, but also a necessary thing for humans to do as complexity proliferates in almost every career. And I think what we'll see is universities maintaining contact in different ways beyond sort of, the odd free lecture or request for a donation, and much more about a lifelong relationship, not only between the university and the alumni, but between the alumni in helping each other struggle through this constant need to remain relevant and current and expert.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.